Hey, Chris, how you doing?
How are you? Thanks for having me on.
Oh, no, you're welcome. Thank you for coming on. I really appreciate it. Hey, so today, everybody, we want to just kind of break down USC football and what is going on over there in Los Angeles, California. You know, we always hear it's sunny and beautiful, but we never get down to the real nitty gritty of what's going on out there at football and what's been going on the past few seasons. So, can you give us a little bit of insight to just what's the excitement right now with the team, especially with the changes for the coaching and a lot of players coming in and out of the transfer portal? What's the excitement around LA right now?
Well, first, before I get into that, I just want to say I was a little hesitant to come on this podcast because, as I can see in the background and on your shirt, Oklahoma, USC Oklahoma, not exactly getting along right now, especially on social media. So I thought maybe is this a trap? Is he bringing me on? Is he going to bring all my exes on or something? Or for a gotcha moment? I don't know. So no, it doesn't seem to be anything like that. But yes, it's been very exciting. You know, obviously in those first few couple of months and weeks when Lincoln Riley came on, there was this rejuvenated energy with the program that had been sort of checked out among the fan base, just did not care about USC football, which is the worst thing you can have for your program. Not a program that's excited or angry. It's just apathetic. They don't care about it. And Lincoln Riley really rejuvenized the fan base and got them really excited for the season, even though they're coming off, a season where they only won 4 games and looked god awful at times. And here you are with a coach that has sort of set the expectations to compete for a Pac-12 championship in his first year. And I know a lot of people have talked about maybe a college football playoff. I think that's way off, especially for a team like I just mentioned that won 4 games. And yes, I know a lot of people have pointed to the transfer portal, which this staff and Riley have really done a marvelous job with, considering all the players that they saw leave, whether that's the draft or players they sat down and talked to and said, hey, we don't think you're going to be a fit here, and maybe you should seek transfer somewhere else. They had to reorganize the team, reestablish a culture at USC because there hadn't really been that strong football culture. And Riley, I heard players talk about this, that he has this playbook for a culture and that there's something they're really excited about and building that and fostering that throughout spring and summer workouts and winter workouts. And we've seen that kind of take root. And, the transfer portal has been kind to USC. Obviously, Caleb Williams, I'm sorry, they took your quarterback. It's part of the college football these days. So Caleb is over here at USC, and he's done a really good job with his leadership and sort of bringing the team together, because there is a lot of chemistry that needs to be fostered so early, especially when you have a team built up of 20 plus transfers and guys that were here last year under Helton. There needs to be an accelerated chemistry process. And just from what I've heard, it seems to be going really, really well. Caleb is a personable guy, and it's easy to build around a guy like that. Obviously, you have some big defensive pickups, like Shane Lee from Alabama, Eric Gentry, a freshman All-American linebacker from ASU. Defense, they really hit that hard. They could have done a little bit better with an impact defensive lineman, but, across the board, I think they've done a really good job of filling holes and then getting some guys that can take their team to the next level. A guy like Jordan Addison, obviously, is the other big win for them, a Blitnikoff winner, the first time a major college football award winner has entered the portal and he ends up at USC. Did they need Jordan Addison? No, they had a really stacked wide receiver core with, Mario Williams, also from Oklahoma, but Brendan Rice, Terrell Bynum, Gary Bryan, former 5-star, and Kyle Ford. They had guys across the board, but they didn't have that true number one. So you could have gotten by this season without Jordan Addison, but you want him on your side. And he's going to be a difference maker for that team in terms of taking the offense to that next level. So a lot of excitement for these guys that are coming in. I know a lot of people are excited to see them in action for the first time. Practices have been closed down, so we haven't gotten to see them fully with the team yet, and we won't see that until September 3rd with that opener. But overall, fans are really fired up for what's coming this season for USC football.
Yeah, and you keep apologizing about Caleb Williams and Mario Williams. And don't feel sorry. I've made a video on it, and I've talked about it before. You can't dock these players for entering the transfer portal when a coach leaves. Caleb Williams came to Oklahoma to play with Lincoln Riley, to play for him. And when Lincoln Riley left into the transfer portal, yeah, I think there was like this misconception that maybe he would stay because he played through the Alamo Bowl and everything. I think fans kind of gave their hopes up a little bit. But, Caleb Williams came to play for Lincoln Riley, and Mario Williams came to play with Caleb Williams. Caleb Williams recruited him to OU, right? So I can't dock either of those two. Now I can dock Lincoln Riley all day long because I think he threw the season away, but that's just me and my take. But, it's interesting what you said about how, they kind of let players go and told them to go explore other options if they didn't fit the culture. And that's pretty interesting because you guys had not only Jackson Dart on your team, who's a really good quarterback, but you guys had Keaton Slovis out there as well. And I'm like, man, you're letting two of those guys go. I mean, surely one of them would have at least went, with Caleb Williams there, because that quarterback room would have been really tough. But not only that, but you lose Michael Trigg as well. Like, do you think really that those three guys just did not fit the culture? Or do you think it was just they didn't want to compete with some of the players that Lincoln Riley was going to bring in there because Lincoln Riley is going to attract the best talent on the offensive side?
You should say not all of those guys that left USC's program were not specifically guys that didn't fit the culture. A lot of them were, but some of them were just guys that wanted to explore their options elsewhere. I think they absolutely would have loved to have a guy like Michael Trigg for that tight end room, which is a little thin right now, but I think they absolutely would have wanted to keep a guy like that around. Jackson Dart obviously is a high caliber quarterback target prospect. And, that Dart is the interesting one because a lot of fans were split on that when he initially entered, because it was like last season he was deemed as maybe a savior for the season. Obviously that didn't work out. They had a lot more issues on offense that could not just be, fixed by a dual threat quarterback like Jackson Dart. Even though he made a lot of spectacular plays, it just wasn't enough. There was too many issues on the offense. So a lot of fans were excited for his potential pairing with Lincoln Riley, but it always felt like Caleb Williams was always going to make the move to USC, as you said, wanted to play for Lincoln Riley. So obviously that just puts, the QB room in an interesting situation because you have these two quarterbacks, Miller Moss being the other highly recruited freshman quarterback that was in that class last season, and Dart, who, I think would be really, really good quarterbacks in the system, but he's bringing in a guy like Caleb Williams who it was his number one guy out of that class. And it's a guy who has experience in his offense and a guy who has had success in that offense. So that right there just gives him such an advantage, going into that QB competition. I don't doubt that there would have been a full QB competition, but, Caleb just has all these things going for him on his way to winning that starting quarterback job. So, and I think if you're looking at it like Jackson Dart, it's like, I played last year. I thought I had good plays. I got some accolades. I got some praise. Do I really want to stick around here? The guy who I committed to, Clay Helton isn't here anymore. The coaches that I signed up to play, Coach Daggy and Graham Harrell, they're not here anymore. So does it make sense to start over here sort of with a new staff? And I'm probably not going to start just because of this other guy coming in. It just makes sense for me to go see what's out there and explore options. And, he found that opportunity with Ole Miss that had a quarterback opening, high octane offense there with Lane Kiffin. So SEC, big time football. So I'm not saying Jackson Dart was a cultural casualty, if you will, of, someone being told, maybe you should look elsewhere. I think his situation was more of, I'm going to take stock in what's going on around the country. I want to talk to coaches. Only way I can do that is go in the portal. Let me see what my options are. And I think Heaton was a little bit of the same way. Graham Harrell and Clay Helton were two of his biggest guys when they, gave him a chance as a 3-star prospect out of Arizona. And he ended up, having some really good seasons. Didn't have some great moments at times, but I think those were the guys who really believed in him. And, those guys are gone. So I think it's sort of a similar thing where you're going to want to see what's out there and see your options. And that ended up being Pittsburgh for him. So I wouldn't say those two guys were cultural guys, but those are guys that as quarterbacks, only one quarterback plays. So I think they were just going to look for the best opportunity where they could get the most out of their careers in the short term. Keaton being for one more season and Jackson wanting to compete early and start next season.
Yeah, no, and I mean, again, you said it. You guys got Caleb Williams back there, so you're going to be okay. It wasn't like OU, right, where we lost two five-star quarterbacks, and you got two walk-ons in your room. You guys at least knew what you guys had coming in. I think that was a little bit helpful there. But what about this offensive line, right? I've seen the jokes on Twitter, and seriously though, we all know it. The offensive line was not great last year. Is there in Lincoln Riley does not have the offensive line coach that he had at OU with him at USC. So what have you heard around the development around the offensive line? And you guys lost out on Josh Connerly Jr., which OU did as well. And it doesn't seem like you guys have been able to nail maybe a big target yet on the offensive line. So what have you heard around that development or changes happening there? Because we saw it here at Oklahoma. Caleb Williams is good, but if you can't provide him at least a little bit of protection, it's going to be hard to win some games.
Right. And USC's offensive line is sort of in a really interesting spot because I think there is concern, but I think there's also a lot of stability with that group. And I think the concern is that they don't have a lot of depth. I think they have a strong top 6 guys that they can rely on to play snaps and guys that have played snaps and have starts under their belt. But beyond those 6 guys, it falls off the cliff with guys that haven't shown that they can play or haven't played in a college football game. Those are guys from a 2020 class where they signed 6 guys and only 2 of them really have emerged, that being Cortland Ford and a Jonah Monheim. And, development what has been an issue with the offensive line dating back, several seasons. And I think Clay McGuire, who is back at Washington State, I think he did a phenomenal job with that group last year. And if you talk to any USC fan that kind of watched 2020 season and then this season, they would say that there was a large jump in the play of the offensive line group. Now, they weren't the best, and they did have those issues at times, but you could kind of see the growth that they had under Clay McGuire, who is more tailored to coaching offensive linemen in an air raid system that Graham Harrell was running. And Tim Trevino, their offensive lineman before that, was more so of a pro-style guy, didn't really have that experience in an air raid, so it just didn't fit well. And you could see a much better difference when you had an air raid guy in there and as opposed to a guy who's more used to a pro-style. So off the top, USC's offensive line, starting-wise, I think they're a really solid group. I think they could be one of the best group in the Pac-12. You have Andrew Voorhees, who's, he's felt like he started a million games out there left guard. He's going to be, possibly a day 2 pick in the NFL draft if he's healthy and he can showcase what he can do. He played left tackle last season at the end of the season when they had some injuries, but he is an interior guy and, he could be a 3rd round, 2nd round pick. Bobby Haskins is their big guy out of the portal, has experience at left tackle, which is where they're going to need him to play, but he did have a severe ankle foot injury in the winter, and he did not get to participate in spring. So obviously you're concerned with a big man like that having a foot injury or an ankle injury, so that's something we're going to have to monitor. But reports have been coming out that he's healthy, good to go, so that's a great sign for them. But if he's not healthy, you have a guy like Cortland Ford who started the season at left tackle, big guy out of Texas who was committed to, I believe, LSU at some point, just looked like an NFL guy as a true freshman. And he's really taken a step. He's an athletic guy, and he's really excited about this offense because it asks a lot of the offensive linemen and it lets them play a little bit in space, do some pulling, whatever that may be. And he's a guy who likes to get out and run. And then you have Jonah Monheim, who started at right tackle. If Haskins is healthy, I think he'll be your swing guy, Monheim. And, he's a guy who can play interior and offensive tackle as well. So that's a critical guy for them. And he's put on about 30, 25 pounds of muscle. And, that's under Benny Wiley. And that's I know Benny Wiley has taken a lot of flack from Oklahoma fans. I'm not going to pretend like I don't see it on social media, but the guys have really responded to him, and you could see a difference in the offensive linemen in their bodies, the guys who have put on, 15 pounds, 10 pounds of muscle, stuff like that. And then Brett Nealon, he's been the starting center. This will be his third season, I believe. So he is dependable. He's a veteran. And then Justin Dedich, who is a fan favorite, just a spark plug of a guy, a guy who's ripping his shirt off in workouts, to get the team hyped. That kind of nasty offensive lineman, recruited as a center, but has adapted to play guard out of need for them. And he is a little bit undersized for a guard, but he's got great technique. He's a guy who literally played every position on the offensive line in high school: center, guard, tackle, whatever, as a center prospect. So, he's a guy who, is a locker room guy that you want. He's a guy who could be a team captain at some point. And so right off the bat, those five, those six, that will be the makeup of this offensive line. And I think they can be the best in the Pac-12 if everything goes well. But if they get, 2 injuries, and injuries happen on the offensive line, I'm kind of worried about what that's going to look like, because they don't have a lot of depth. They brought in a JUCO guy, Cooper Lovelace, but he is a raw guy, only started playing high school football his senior year, did a season in JUCO, and I have a high potential for him. He could be a guy who starts next season, but they're really going to need to get him some experience early in case an injury hits, especially at the interior. The interior is where they're the weakest right now.
Yeah, and I think it helps you guys having Bobby Haskins coming over from Virginia, and he's definitely went up in his rating from high school to transfer. So I think that'll help you guys out. But give us a little bit of insight to this defense, right? I know you've seen it, Alex Grinch and the OU defense. They got flack while they were here at OU, so it ain't anything new. USC fans should be pretty expectant for that to come. But you guys actually had I think a solid defensive recruiting in 2022 with you guys got Damani Jackson, who I believe was, correct me if I'm wrong, highly favored to go to Alabama until that coaching change happened at USC. But then you guys also got people like Zion Branch, right? He was a 4-star safety out of Vegas. And then you guys got Latrell McCutcheon from OU, who, let's be honest, a lot of OU fans were excited for him. Now they hate him. So give us a little bit of insight to what you think we should expect to see from that defense, because I think that's probably the most intriguing part. I know what Lincoln's going to put up at offense out there. I'm curious to see if anything on the defense is going to change.
Right. The defense, I would say, is sort of the whole key to USC maybe being a good team or having a good season in 2022 to having, a great season, and that being, getting maybe to the Pac-12 championship or winning 9 or 10 games. That's really going to be the difference in how that defense sort of bounces back under Alex Grinch with a new scheme, new coaches. And I don't know how much USC football you watched last season, but that defense was just terrible, like historically bad, giving up close over 30 points a game last season, getting blown out by teams that USC never gets blown out by. An Oregon State came in and dropped, close to, I believe, 50 points or 45 points. Stanford, who was also terrible last year, just dropping 40 points on them. So that defense had a lot of work to be done. Alex Grinch had his work cut out for him when he inherited his defense. And I think you saw a lot of departures on that defensive side of the ball. And you saw them bring in, a lot of culture guys, one being Shane Lee. The linebacker room was a big issue last season. They were just slow at times. They took bad angles, poor tackling. And I think Shane is a guy who helps alleviate a lot of that, not just on the field, but off the field as well, because he's been a guy who has really impacted the whole defense, especially those young guys in that room. He won a national championship at Alabama. He's been in a program that knows how to win, so he kind of sets that blueprint and helps push that culture. We've had guys, a young linebacker like Rajon Davis, who was a top 100 signee in the 2021 class. He was like, I see him, Shane Lee, lifting in the gym, and it makes me want to lift more. So that's sort of the impact that he's sort of had in that room. They've gotten some DBs. You mentioned Damani Jackson. Unfortunately, he was coming off a knee injury, and was very limited in spring, but Alex Grinch, those guys, they really like speed. And, he joked, he said, I heard he was pretty fast. And yeah, he's a 10-3 kind of guy. He's got that kind of speed, long, doesn't look like a freshman physically. He is swole. He looks like a guy who's been in a college weight room for multiple years. So they're hoping he's going to be ready to compete in the fall. And, sounds like he will be healthy. And I think the cornerback position is really one of the key spots because they lost both their starters from last season. They bring in a guy like Mekhi Blackman, but who has starting experience at Colorado. But behind him, they don't have a lot of that going on. So they're going to be young on the edges. They're going to be young at safety. They got Kalen Bullock, a guy who was a freshman All-American last season. But they need to figure out what that kind of looks like with maybe Latrell or Xavier Alford out of Texas. I'm sure that's a name you're familiar with. He is a transfer from the Longhorns. He came on late last season and, he showcased some ball skills, made some good interceptions, and he kind of emerged as that other strong safety with Kalen at free. And he was also injured in spring, so we didn't get to see a lot of him, but he's a guy who can compete for that starting job. And a lot of it is also going to come down to how they play in the defensive line, because the defensive line got gutted a lot last year. And, this Grinch defense doesn't really utilize big bodies to take up blockers. They're based on quickness and getting at the quarterback, kind of creating that havoc, getting in the backfield. So they've got some guys there. Obviously, they have Corey Foreman, who's a number 1 overall prospect. You have Romello Height out of Auburn, who's going to probably be their starting edge rusher at that rush end position. I think they needed to get a little bit more impactful at the defensive line spots. They have, a guy like Tuli Tuipulotu, who I think is super underrated, even though he is being talked about a little bit on the national stage. He is just a beast. I think he's going to have a massive breakout season. 6'5", 6'4", 260, 70 pounds, just so freaking strong. I think you could have double-digit sacks this season playing at that defensive tackle spot. Brandon Peely is a guy that, he's 6'4", 330 pounds, can do a back handspring, can dunk a basketball, just a freak athlete for his body size. I watch him, during games. He's warming up with the wide receivers just for fun. And, he's got kind of that athleticism, but he's coming off an Achilles tear last season, which is, a tough injury to come back from, especially as a football player. And they have options at the defensive line, but they just need everything to come together, and they just need to communicate, which is an issue last year. They need to tackle better, and they just need to get to the ball. The issues were they were missing their assignments. They didn't have a lot of effort, and as I mentioned, tackling. And those were some of the things that Grinch and the staff really hit on in spring camp, and I think we saw a lot of growth there. But he'd be the first one to say every day in practice, we have a long way to go. So I'm excited to see what this team kind of looks like early in fall camp and see, what it looks like after, the progress of summer and kind of working on that scheme and trying to get it down and install and all that. So I think they have some potential, but the offense is definitely going to be carrying this team, I think, early on, and have to see if that defense can sort of gel and find their groove as they move forward through fall.
Yeah, and you kind of mentioned them, right? I think it's really great that you guys got people like Romello and Bryson Shaw and Shane Lee, because those are 3 guys that play for they either play in the SEC or they play in an elite level program. So they know how to win. They might not be, the best player on those teams, but they know how to win and they came from winning programs. And I think that'll help you guys out a lot, because maybe they can be a voice or a leader in that locker room when, they need them to step up. So I think it'll be big for you. If you guys can put together at least a competent defense with the offensive guys that you guys have out there, even if the offensive line isn't great, Caleb Williams is going to be able to make the plays. And, there's a chance that you guys could have a chance at that college football berth if everything falls right. I think it just, again, you have to put out at least a competent defense, and you've seen that in the past. You'll get blown out without one, and it gets hard to get there. So, and plus, if USC's won 11 games and only lost 1, and OU's sitting there with 11 or 12 wins, they're going to put USC in because they're going to want that OU-USC matchup big time the first year. they'll want that. The ratings will be great. So, well, let's go ahead and let's dive into their schedule this year, because it's interesting to me because I think their schedule is maybe a little bit more favorable this year because you guys don't see Oregon, you guys don't see Washington, right? I think the hardest games on your schedule is probably at Utah, Notre Dame at home, and at UCLA. Let's kind of walk through this week by week. Tell me what you think, starting with week 1 at Rice at home.
Get kind of barbecued in that first opener. Lincoln Riley and that team, that offense, that defense is going to want to send a message early on. It's going to be like, hey, this isn't last season. This isn't a team that was just getting spanked in the Coliseum. I think they're going to want to put on a show for that first game of the Lincoln Riley era, season opener, Coliseum. They want to pack that place out. They need the fans to trust this team and get them back out because they were hurt a lot last year because, if a team was coming to Coliseum, they were usually leaving with a historic win. So they need to kind of set the tone early. And I think Rice is just going to, catch a hot one on September 3rd. So I think that's an easy win for them and a win you can go and kind of make a statement early on.
Yeah, tickets are $36, it looks like, as low as $36. So they should be able to pack the Coliseum. I don't think that'll be hard. But then week 2, they go to Stanford, 6:30 game. So I think, that'll be a prime time game on ABC. What do you think about that one?
So the Rice game, I know, let's say they go out to Rice, like they just take the bat to Owls and it's like, I don't know, 60-17 or something. They just blow them out. Obviously all the talking heads, college football is going to be going crazy with the Trojans. The Trojans are back, but it's Rice, and I think if you do that again against a Stanford team, which, I don't think Stanford is going to be great this season. I don't think they're like a Pac-12 contender or anything like that. They could probably go to a bowl game. Tanner McKee is a really good quarterback prospect, possible first-round draft pick, but I think they'll be okay. But I think it sends a better message if you go on the road to Stanford, night game, ABC, primetime, and you do it again. I think that's a team they can absolutely, toy with and beat up on. It's going to depend on what that defense can do, stopping that Stanford running attack and kind of containing McKee. As I said, he's a really good quarterback prospect, big, strong, big arm. But if they go out again and they just put up points on Stanford and kind of run them out of their own stadium, I think you're going to see, that's when you really can start kind of talking about like, oh, USC, Lincoln Riley, maybe they can make some noise this season because, as I mentioned, Stanford probably not going to be that great this season, but that's a road win on the road in a conference that, a lot of people think USC can just run through. And if they run through Stanford, I think a lot of people are going to be, I think a lot more money is going to be moving on USC to maybe make a college football playoff because if you just run through Pac-12, maybe you take a loss to Utah or Notre Dame. But if you win out, you're 10-2. I think you could kind of talk yourself into, especially if you win the Pac-12. I think people would, kind of buy that team.
Yeah, so let's just say you guys are 2-0 there. Stanford, Stanford's never a tough win for anybody, I don't think, even when they're down. I just don't think that they're a tough team or an easy team to get past. It's not easy to get into Stanford, and so when they can attract talent, it's usually good talent. So then you guys, week 3, you guys have Fresno State at home, 9:30 game. Tell us a little bit more about that one.
It's another one where I feel like USC, everything's going right. I think they're leaving that 3-0. Fresno State, that's a good program. They've had some good seasons over the last couple of years. I think that's a sneaky team. A team maybe they'll put up a much better fight, I believe, than Rice and maybe even Stanford. But I just think that's a program that's going through their own transition a little bit with new coaching staff and all that. So again, it's still a group of 5 team. And if you're USC, you have all this talent. You should not, be struggling with that team coming into the Coliseum. And those teams, these like Fresno State, these Western Michigans, those were the teams that under Clay Helton, USC really played down to their level and struggled with. So I don't think fans are expecting to come out, in that game and it's 24-21 at halftime. I think they're expecting to be up 28-3 at halftime and kind of rolling into that second half. So that's a game where I think Fresno be a little frisky, but in the end, I think USC is getting out there with a comfortable win.
Yeah, so that's 3-0. In the next three games, we'll just group them all together. You guys are at Oregon State, and then you guys have Arizona State and Washington State at home.
Yeah, that's an interesting just kind of schedule there. Just you're going to some places, and Oregon State. I'm a big fan of Jonathan Smith and what he's done over there at Oregon State, and they put a hurt on the Trojans last season. Their first win in the Coliseum in I forget what the number was. It was like 60 years or maybe 100 years. I don't know. It was something crazy. But they're a program that's doing some nice things over there, and you got to go to that stadium, and that's a long trip, and that's a tough trip to get to. So, but again, I can see USC rolling through that part of the schedule. I mean, Arizona State is just like a dumpster fire at this point with their coaching scandal and all that. Like, are they mentally going to be in it, especially if they're maybe they're 1-2 to start the season? Maybe they fire Herm Edwards 3 games into the year. I mean, that could be similar to what USC went through when they fired Helton after week 2. Maybe if they come out flat, they could have an interim head coach by that time. So I don't think USC fans are kind of worried about Arizona State. They have talent over there, but a lot of it is left, and they're kind of just struggling right now. Washington State, Jake Dickert, I like what he did at Washington State, but again, that's a team where USC has a talent advantage, and I don't think they should, especially when they're coming to the Coliseum. Those are games where I feel like they can get to that part of the schedule, with not a lot of resistance. I think if I'm ranking those teams in terms of danger, I think it's Oregon State just because it's on the road and they're going to be a well-coached team, and then I would say Washington State and then Arizona State. But just through that schedule, I can see them being undefeated still.
Yeah, and that's I think they should beat all 3. Talent wise, you're out talent on every team. So the next one that you guys have up is at Utah, and I think that's probably the game that if any game on this schedule is going to get USC, it's at Utah, especially with the season that Utah put up and what they got this year. Give us a little bit more insight into that one.
The Utah game is always fun, and every year it's traditionally like, oh, this sort of sets the tone for the Pac-12 South. This is what's going to tell us who is going to come out of the South. And, for the most part, USC wins at home and loses on the road in Utah. That's sort of the formula with these two teams. But obviously, it's a new era with the Lincoln Riley era, and this is going to be a tough one to go to at that stadium. It's so tough to play there. It's a really cool experience going up to that stadium. And right now I think I have that as a loss just because that Utah team, they were so young last season and they had such a fun run. They had an incredible season going to the Rose Bowl, terrific game against Ohio State, close one. In the end they probably could have won that game, absolutely. And I think they just have a lot of confidence. They have a lot of swagger after what they did last season. They know how to win. This team knows how to beat teams. And, they want to defend that title. And I think a lot of people will probably be buzzing about USC, especially if they're 6-0 going to that game. And I think that's just going to be motivation for Kyle Whittingham and that Utah team, who has always been an underdog and loves playing with that underdog mentality. So I would probably have Utah winning that game. I don't think it'll be a blowout. I think it'll be a fun back and forth game. And I think the key will be USC's defense. And if they can handle Cameron Rising and, that Utah ground attack and that physicality that they bring. USC was not a physical team last year. I know Grinch and that staff, that's something they were also hitting on in spring camp. So that's going to be the real test. You could walk through, a Washington State or a dumpster fire Arizona State or Stanford, or Rice, but Utah is going to be the real test. They don't really get a harder test through those first 7 games than Utah, and that's going to be a barometer for the rest of the season. Like if they go into, they go up there to Utah and they lose by a touchdown, I think a lot of USC fans would be happy with that. Well, not happy with that, but you know what I'm saying? It's like hey, that was going to be our toughest first game schedule. I think we learned a lot about this team, and they can absolutely see them again at the end of the season. Just because with the Pac-12 moving away from divisions, USC losing to Utah doesn't automatically, you know, box them out of the Pac-12 championship. It's just based on win percentage, so they can still run the table in the Pac-12 and get there and face Utah in the Pac-12 championship. So again, I think they'd be pleasantly surprised, especially after a team that lost 4 games last season. If they're 6-0, the expectations will be to come out of that game 7-0. But if it's a close loss, I can see fans being like, Utah's a great team. What they did last season, defending champs. Our defense still needs work to do. Our offense, they'll get them next time. And I think fans would be, very optimistic at 6-1 that they can continue to roll on for a really good season. So Utah is going to be the true test of the first half of this schedule.
Yeah, and the thing is about Utah is, they've got 2, I think, really tough tests right up front before they have to play USC, right? They have to go to Gainesville, and they have to go to UCLA. So I think they're going to be ready. And let's just say they win that, and they're 6-0, and USC's 6-0. That's a game day right there. That's college game day.
Absolutely, a lot of buzz there.
That's where it's at. Yeah. So the next game, the next 3 on the schedule, I think USC should blow past again. Right. You're at Arizona, probably one of the worst teams in college football last year. I don't think we have to really go over that one. So I think that one's a win, 7-1. But then you got California and Colorado. I just don't think Colorado is going to be physical enough this year to compete with USC. Colorado might put up an interesting game, but I think USC can come out of that one with a win. What do you think?
Especially if you kind of lose that Utah game, I think you're obviously going to be motivated off that stretch to just go bananas on whoever you got. And, obviously that's 3 of the weaker teams in the Pac-12. Arizona, they've done a really good job recruiting and kind of working the portal as well, but I just don't think they're there to kind of compete against USC, especially talent-wise. So I think that's a win too. And then I believe that Colorado game is on a Friday, if I'm not mistaken. That might be their Friday game. Colorado, they're going through sort of a transition themselves. Well, not fully transition, but their coach, Carl Donnell, is on the hot seat. And, that program has struggled since they kind of had that breakout season in 2020. So, they might be looking at a midseason coaching change if they're struggling early on. And I know they've had a lot of talent leave as well. Brendan Rice, obviously he is a Trojan now, so they lost one of their better receivers or their best receiver. So, I think nothing would be what's the word I'm looking for? Nothing would help, the burn of, maybe taking a loss to Utah than running through these 3 teams, right off the bat and being like, hey, let's get back on our momentum. We have some big games coming up with Notre Dame and, possibly a Pac-12 championship. Let's get set. Let's run through these teams and get back on track.
Yeah. So let's just say at that point, you guys are 9-1. Now you guys are hitting up the in-game stretch of your season. You guys are playing at UCLA, which is, let's be honest, pretty much a home game. And then you got to play Notre Dame at home. And Notre Dame's going to be a damn good team, especially with Marcus Freeman there, especially next year. But I think if you win both of those games and then, you guys come into the Pac-12 championship with 1 loss, you can either redeem your loss to Utah, or, you go in there and have to beat Oregon, which could be very good. You guys are in the college football playoffs with 1 loss at that point. What do you think is going to happen in those 2 games?
UCLA is certainly interesting. I would sort of maybe, I don't know, I would flirt with it as being maybe a trap game, just depending on how UCLA looks. Maybe because, if you follow Pac-12, Chip Kelly and the Bruins have been sort of this weird enigma team. Sometimes they start off hot, and then sometimes they start off flat, and maybe they're like 1-2, and then they win like 4 games, and then they lose games. They're just sort of this weird team that just kind of goes up and down, up and down. You're not really sure what you're going to get. I think they went to their first bowl game last season, so they have a little bit of momentum. But, if you told me if you said, oh, UCLA is going to be 9 wins, I'd be like, okay. Or if you told me UCLA is going to win 3 games next season, I was like, okay. Like, I just don't know what UCLA will look like in the end because it's always wacky. So going to that game will be interesting. But if USC, is rolling at those, what are we at, 9 wins, 9-1, and you're kind of looking ahead to like Notre Dame, which I would expect to be ranked at that point. It's going to be interesting to see where they're at, but I feel like they're going to be a top 25 team for the most of the season. And if UCLA is kind of down, I don't think they would be sort of overlooking them in a sense because it is a rivalry game. UCLA put the hurt on the Trojans last year, and I know a lot of guys who were on that team last year want payback. So, but I would still kind of throw it in there as maybe a trap game, especially if UCLA is bad. This could be a game where it's like, a shootout between a Chip Kelly offense who's just in his bag play calling wise against a defense that we don't really know what they're going to look like by that time of the season. And, Lincoln Riley and Chip Kelly, two offenses just going at it, just putting up points. That's what it could look like, as far as I'm concerned. But I would feel confident at USC at 9-1, kind of leaving that game, especially, as you said, basically a home game, kind of leaving that with a win. And then for Notre Dame, the Notre Dame game, obviously you get them at home, and I'm just really curious to see what Notre Dame's going to look like under Marcus Freeman. I know they've lost a lot, but I still think they'll be a top 25 program or right there at the cusp. His first year as a head coach there, that could come with some lumps, some, expectations, maybe recruit really well so they have talent, but I could easily see USC, beating the Irish at home, especially if you're 10-1 playing for a playoff spot. You have a lot of recruiting momentum at this point. You're going to pack that place. You're going to have a bunch of recruits there. I could see them capitalizing on all of that and sort of, taking into the Irish and maybe, taking that game and kind of, solidifying all these expectations that people had and the expectations that Lincoln Riley has even set for this program, competing from year one. We won 4 games last year. That doesn't matter. We're going to compete year one, 2022. And that would kind of, be a stunning turnaround for a team that looked awful last season to being a team that is going to be talked about for the playoff because, as you pointed out, an 11-1 USC team with Lincoln Riley absolutely getting playoff buzz at this point.
Yeah, and I think we're going to find out a lot about Notre Dame and what they're going to put up for you guys. Week 1, they have to go to Columbus and play Ohio State, right? And then their schedule doesn't get easier. They got to play BYU, they got to play Clemson, North Carolina. So we're going to find out a lot about that Notre Dame team before they have to play you guys. I think we're going to have a good feel for that game. But like for me personally, I think it's a loss just because I think Notre Dame is going to be a really good team. I really do. I think they're a dark horse to make the college football playoffs next year. But there's a chance they could come out 12-1 in that game and then, go have to play in the college football play or in the big Pac-12 game for a college football playoff berth, right? And that's either going to come up against Utah or Oregon. I think it's probably unlikely that Utah gets there, especially with their schedule. I mean, they're going to play at Eugene as well, too. And, Dane Lanning's going to put a really competent offense out there. But I'm curious to see this Notre Dame game because it's going to be your guys' best defensive team you guys have to play all season.
Mm-hmm.
Even with, the changeover in coaching. It's going to be the best defensive team. So if you guys can get over that hump, you guys are looking pretty good. So the UCLA game, I wouldn't be worried about that. You guys have sin what Lincoln Riley can do against OU Texas and OU OSU. If it comes to a shootout, he knows how to win those games. So... But, it just depends. I think, they could have 2 or 3 losses on here. They could have 1 loss or even no losses. I think it's going to be a good first season for USC. It might not be the way they want to win, but I think they can go out there and win a lot of those games. So real quick, as we get to the end, let's talk just a little bit about this 2023 recruiting class, which, of course is getting a lot of hype, right? Lincoln Riley, he's a great recruiter. I didn't like it here at OU either, but they call him the quarterback guru. And let's be honest. There's a lot of other programs that could put out a bunch of quarterbacks, but he does have who I think is the number 1 quarterback in this class, and Malachi Nelson. Now I think any given day, the top 5 quarterbacks could switch for that number 1 spot, but let's talk about that recruiting class, and what kind of that hype is right now. You guys are ranked number 17 overall. And I know you guys are in contention for a lot of other guys. So, what's that excitement around that class and what you guys are expecting to see and where you guys should end up at the end of it?
Are you saying that about Malachi because he was a former Oklahoma commit, or because you don't want to say Arch Manning, a Texas commit, is the number one overall player?
No, Arch Manning's not the number one overall player. I think Malachi Nelson is. I think he's a much better talent because I think he's a much better dual threat quarterback. I was on with Ty Smith from Around the Table Sports, and he even thinks Nico is the best quarterback in this class. A lot of people are saying, hey, look out for Jackson Arnold. A late bloomer, he could potentially be the number one in that class. I think Arch Manning, I think, we've all seen the tweets and stuff, but he may be getting a little bit of hype for that Manning name, and he's potentially going to be a really good quarterback. I just don't think he's as good as Malachi Nelson.
Okay. Give me the response. You backed it up with what you backed it up. But yeah, I mean, Nelson and that offensive side of the ball, they're building on that class. I don't think anyone's kind of worried about USC getting skilled players moving forward. USC struggled to get wide receivers under wide receiver coach Gary Colbert. They were just getting out-recruited by Oregon, and other teams were stealing their skilled player talent. A lot of good wide receivers left the state of California because USC couldn't lock them down. That's not going to be an issue anymore moving forward, with a guy like Dennis Simmons and Lincoln Riley recruiting for that offense. They already have Mekhi Lemon, number one athlete, as you are familiar with him. And then Zachariah Branch, the number one wide receiver in the prospect, who a lot of people, say electrifying, sort of like a young Reggie Bush. I know that name gets thrown out there a lot with Zachariah, but he has got 10-3 speed. He's not the biggest guy, but man, he will run by you, snatch your ankles and all that on his way to the end zone. So just a dynamic player for USC to build around in the future, and Lincoln Riley to build around in the future. And, they have their running backs already set. Amarian Peterson, Quentin Joyner, both out of Texas, kind of those big body. A little bit, both of those guys are underrated, I think, and I think they're going to open up a lot of eyes moving forward. But the big question for this class is going to be the offensive line, because, as I mentioned, with the offensive line, we were talking about them, a lot of those guys are on their way out, and USC doesn't have much talent in the stables waiting to kind of replace those guys. They recruited very poorly at the offensive line in terms of getting blue chip national guys. So USC needs to hit, you don't need, they've already missed out, on a Francis Mauioga, who number one offensive tackle, who went to Miami, missed out on Lucas Simmons earlier this week, who committed to Florida State. You can still play for that flip, especially if Florida State has a bad season and maybe fires their coaching staff, Mike Norvell. So you still got to keep in contact with him, but USC needs to get, some talent, whether that's, some local guys that maybe you have to develop a little more. Yeah, that's fine. But it would help to get, maybe a four-star guy like a Spencer Fano or a Caleb Lomu out of Arizona. Both of the guys are consensus four-star prospects. Get a couple of those guys. You missed out on a five-star, that's okay. The transfer portal is right there to help you alleviate those misses because, good offensive linemen, they can't enter the portal and they get snatched up quick. So you got to be quick on that. So there are ways to get around missing on those blue chips that they've missed on, but they still need to recruit the heck out of the offensive line class in this cycle. And that's going to be the difference between, this being a really, really good class to a great class. Some people think this class can be top 5 in the country. And if USC runs the table and, maybe gets to that 10-2, 11-1, in the discussion for college football playoff, absolutely that momentum for recruiting is going to take off, because a lot of what Lincoln Riley and the staff have to do with this recruiting at this point in time is recruit a little bit based on faith, because USC only won 4 games last year. They were terrible. And I think people just want to see what USC and Lincoln Riley can do on the field. So when they start winning games, they're going to have a lot more to sell than come be a part of this. This is what we're going to do. You can say what you're going to do, but people and recruits and families, they want to see it on the field. And once USC can put that product on the field, I think that's going to open up a lot more recruiting avenues for this class. They're building it defensively. They need some defensive linemen. A guy like Mateo Ugielele, 5-star defensive lineman. He needs to be in this class for them. He's a local guy. Can't let him go across the country to Ohio State or Alabama or Clemson, where his brother is. Got to keep him home. And, they've got some nice defensive backs. I don't think they're going to have to worry about defensive backs because Dante Williams, their cornerbacks coach, is just an out-of-this-world recruiter, three-time consecutive Pac-12 recruiter of the year. So there's a defensive back out there, and he wants him. He's going to be in competition to get him. So they need a linebacker, too. I know Tackett Curtis is their number one target, the four-star linebacker out of Louisiana. He's down to them, Ohio State and Wisconsin. So if USC pulls that one out, he's going to commit at some point in July. If they pull that out, that's their kind of their centerpiece right now for the defensive class, and probably will move them back into that top 12, top 10. I would expect them to be, I believe they're at 11 commits right now. I would expect them to be around maybe 15, 16 going into the season. And then if they win, that class is really going to take off.
Yeah, I mean, the excitement's going to be around that class if they start to win. I was looking at the offensive line just a minute ago, and they don't have. I don't think they're in contention with anybody in the top 50. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I didn't see them in contention for any of those guys. So, or maybe it was top 25. But you guys definitely are going to have a good class. I mean, you guys are in contention. Looks like you guys are going to get Deuce Robinson. I think somebody that a lot of people are overlooking. And correct me if I'm wrong, I'm looking at this. It looks like the 247 Sports rankings updated today. I might be wrong, though, but it looks like David Hicks might have slipped or might have went up. But Nicholas Harbor, he's a 5-star athlete out of Washington, D.C., and he was originally favored to go to Oklahoma. Now Oklahoma's not even in that list, right? He's looking at a couple SEC schools, Michigan, Miami, but Caleb Williams is out at USC. And with you guys going to the Big Ten, I think there's a possible recruiting pitch there of saying, hey, your family will be able to watch you, right? We're going to go to Maryland. And so, I mean, what do you think about that? I mean, I think it's a good potential opportunity for you guys to get another, top 10 player in the country.
Nick Harbor, just out of my neck of the woods in DMV. I'm a Maryland native, so I understand the talent that comes out of there with Caleb and those guys they recruited, and Lincoln has recruited the DMV very well. And Harbor is absolutely in contention to maybe go to USC. And if they have a big season, I like those odds a lot better. DMV kids, for whatever, just really like USC. They like that California vibe. It's a big. They get the big city vibe of California, but they don't get the the weather of a Maryland DMV area. So they like it in that regard. But with Harbor, the thing is going to come down to is track. He is a track phenom. He could be a professional in track. He doesn't need to play football. So it's all going to depend on what he wants to do with his career, his athletic career in that regard. Is he going to try to play both? Is he going to, commit to play football and then end up just doing track? Is he going to come over to do track and then, maybe miss football and play football? So I think you're obviously the USC track coaches have been pitching him and recruiting him, and that's a good program. USC has a lot to offer, and especially as a track program as well as their football program. So I think they're very competitive with Nicholas Harbor, and they have a lot of selling points for him. And obviously it helps that Caleb is part of this team. A guy who is from that part of the country and can help sell. Coming to California, and you're right, the Big Ten is a great selling point as well. Like, look, you don't have to travel all the way to go to Wazoo. You can just travel to Ohio State for your family to come see you play. We're going to be there, or we're going to be in Michigan, or we're going to be in Illinois, or we're going to be at Rutgers. So that is a great point that they can help sell that visibility, for him and his family, not having to come all the way to the West Coast to see him play. And I think they are absolutely a contender for him. As you mentioned, Deuce Robinson, there's a lot of skilled players and skilled talent out there for USC to add to this class.
Yeah, no, for sure. You guys will have a good year. So as we wrap up, is there anything you want to say to the USC fans about being patient or anything like that? Or what do you got for them?
There's nothing I could say, because USC fans are going to USC fans. It's college football fans. You can tell them to be patient, but they're not going to listen. It's the summer. There's not a ton to talk about. The fall camps haven't started. Depth charts haven't come out. Practice clips haven't come out, so everyone is just talking about like the potential and freaking out about what could happen or what might not happen. So I can say be patient, but I don't think really anyone's going to listen to me. But I think it's going to be a fun season, and I'm excited for the season, and I hope a lot of fans turn out for the Coliseum because I think this team is going to put on a show this year. Will they win 10 games? They could. Could they win 9 games? Yeah. I don't think they're not going to be as bad as last year. I think they're going to be entertaining this season.